The room was filled with polished wood, glass walls, and the low hum of quiet power that only money and influence could create. The kind of place where every second cost more than most people made in a year. And at the head of the long conference table sat Richard Hale, a self-made billionaire whose name alone could move markets. Yet on this particular morning his confidence was unraveling because standing beside him was his mother, Eleanor Hale, a small silver-haired woman with sharp eyes and trembling hands, who was completely deaf. And despite the interpreters and the assistants and the carefully planned agenda, no one in that room could understand what she was trying to say. Eleanor's hands moved urgently, her expressions intense, her body leaning forward as if willing the world to slow down and listen. But the two professional interpreters exchanged nervous glances, one of them quietly admitting that Eleanor was using an older, regional form of sign language mixed with personal gestures developed over a lifetime of isolation. And the executives around the table shifted in their seats, some confused, some irritated, some already checking their watches, because this meeting was supposed to finalize a multi-million-dollar foundation project in Eleanor's name, a legacy initiative, and yet the woman it was meant to honor could not make herself understood. Richard tried to stay calm, repeating with forced patience that his mother wanted to speak first, that this mattered, but the air grew heavy with unspoken judgment. A few people assumed she was nervous, others thought she was simply overwhelmed, and one man even whispered that perhaps it would be best to move on. That time was money. Eleanor saw it all on their faces, the dismissal, the pity, the subtle embarrassment, and her hands began to shake harder, her eyes filling with frustration, because she knew something was wrong with the plan, something important they were missing, something she had lived long enough to recognize. And then, from the back of the room came a small movement that no one noticed at first. A young black boy, no more than 10 years old, sitting quietly against the wall, his feet not even touching the floor. He was Marcus, the son of the building's maintenance supervisor, waiting patiently for his father to finish work. He had been drawing in a notebook, listening with half an ear, until he saw Eleanor's hands, the way they moved, the rhythm, the urgency, and his head lifted slowly, his eyes narrowing with recognition. Marcus stood up before fear could stop him, and his small voice cut through the tension as he said softly but clearly that he understood her. The room froze, every head turning toward him, disbelief written openly on faces that moments ago held authority and impatience. Richard frowned in confusion, asking gently if the boy was sure, and Marcus nodded, walking closer, his heart pounding but his hands already moving, answering Eleanor in the same flowing, unconventional signs. Her face changed instantly, shock melting into relief, then into joy, and she began signing rapidly, tears streaming down her cheeks, while Marcus translated in a calm, steady voice that contrasted sharply with his age. He explained that Eleanor was saying the foundation plan was wrong because it focused only on technology and elite institutions, that she wanted the money to go to community centers, to poor neighborhoods, to children who were deaf and marginalized like she had been. Children who never had interpreters or fancy schools, only silence and misunderstanding. A murmur rippled through the room, followed by a heavy silence. Marcus continued, explaining that Eleanor had learned her signs from an elderly black woman in her childhood neighborhood who had been deaf to, that their shared isolation had created a language of survival, not textbooks, and that Eleanor feared her legacy would become another polished project that never touched the people who needed it most. Richard's eyes filled with tears he did not bother to hide, because for the first time he truly heard his mother, not through assistance or assumptions, but through a child who had no reason to speak except empathy. The executives sat stunned, some ashamed, some deeply moved. The man who had suggested moving on stared down at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Eleanor reached out and held Marcus's hands, signing slowly now, thanking him, telling him he had given her a voice when the world had taken it away. And Marcus translated that too, his own voice trembling at last. Richard made a decision in that moment, one that would change the course of the foundation, and many lives beyond that room. He announced that the project would be restructured immediately, that Eleanor would personally oversee its direction with Marcus as her communication liaison if his family agreed. Laughter mixed with tears, disbelief turning into applause, and for the first time that morning the room felt human instead of powerful. Later, as the meeting ended and people filtered out quietly, many stopping to thank Marcus, Richard knelt in front of the boy, asking where he had learned to understand such signs, and Marcus explained simply that his grandmother had been deaf. that he grew up listening with his eyes, that when you love someone, you learn their language even if the world doesn't think it's important. Eleanor smiled, touching Marcus's cheek gently, and in that touch was a lifetime of gratitude. Weeks later, the foundation launched anew, funding grassroots deaf education programs in underserved communities, training interpreters in forgotten dialects, building spaces where no one would be ignored for communicating differently. Marcus received a scholarship, but more importantly, he received something rarer, recognition not for his age or background, but for his humanity. And Eleanor, once silent in rooms of power, became the soul of a movement that reminded everyone that understanding does not come from wealth or status, but from listening in ways most people forget, and those who were there that day would remember forever how a child's courage and compassion rewrote a legacy and proved that sometimes the clearest voice in the room belongs to the one everyone almost ignored.